Hello, everyone. Welcome to the press conference. It is Thursday, May 20th, 2021. And our focus remains both launching our Chrysalis calendar and also creating a space, a field for inspiring and supporting the development of all Chrysalis calendars, all different calendars within the Chrysalis that help us all get connected, that help humanity as a whole find each other's transformational conversations and meetings so that we can connect. And we've spent a lot of time over the last few weeks preparing for this, developing it, cultivating the field, working with Vincent at Trove, working with the folks at Kiko Lab, and having intense conversations amongst ourselves about what is it that we're setting, exactly what are we setting out to create here? What is this Chrysalis calendar? And in the last couple of weeks in particular, we've delved in deep about, what is the Chrysalis? What is our view of the Chrysalis? Exactly what are we talking about when we say the Chrysalis? Because before we can have a Chrysalis calendar, we first need to have an understanding of what's the Chrysalis? What's up? What's the deal? So yesterday I went for a jog, and then I came back and drew up a bunch of pictures, and then Marco and I had a meeting and we recorded a video, which I sent out in last night's email, about a half-hour video. And so I'm going to now screen share and go over those drawings and sketches. But first, let me just kind of set the table here a little bit. I believe that the best way for us to communicate with each other and with the world about what we mean by the Chrysalis, right? Welcome back, Michael. We got two Michaels on. That's super cool. Hopefully your bandwidth is better on this one. But as I was saying, in order to communicate to the world, what do we mean by the Chrysalis? I think the best way of communicating it in our meetings earlier this week and last week, we went pretty deep into kind of a bulleted list of these are the bifurcating elements for the Chrysalis. And while I really enjoyed those conversations, it feels to me like the next stage of evolution of all this is to go into story and to have a story about all this. What is the Chrysalis? What's the Chrysalis calendar? What's the story? Something that we can tell either in short form or long form, right? Or anywhere in between, because we are a species that runs on stories. So what's the story of the Chrysalis? And I break it up into 3 books, right? Is how I'm just kind of framing it. Book 1, the caterpillar. Book 2, the Chrysalis. Book 3, the butterfly. And so let me go ahead and screen share. And I really encourage folks to jump in with questions or comments. There's just a few of us here, so very easy to accommodate. Just, you know how like some barber shops say walk-ins welcome, like you don't have to make an appointment. Jump-ins welcome. You don't have to raise your hand, just jump in, okay? So jump-ins welcome. All right. Screen sharing the drawings that I'm cooking up here that Marco and I looked at last night. All right, so the story of the Chrysalis. Book 1, Book 2, Book 3. Book 1, the caterpillar. With the caterpillar, here, I'm just going to highlight here. This is what we're looking at first. What characterizes the caterpillar? For me, the game, the all-day Monopoly game of infinite hoarding on a finite planet without regard for impacts either on other people or the planet, plants, animals, ecosystems. You know, that for me really is the heart of the caterpillar story, this part of the story. We can also talk about the roots of the game, right? You know, how did we come upon such an omnicidal game? Where did that come from? So that's an interesting topic in and of itself. We can then look at the impacts of the game, the destruction of the biosphere and the overheating of the planet. Now, before I go further, let me get off screen share for a moment so we can see each other. Where I'm going with this is I want to create a map of these topics so that we can populate our Chrysalis calendar with meetings on these specific topics. So we can chunk it out and say, okay, let's talk planetary overheating and spend our time talking about that in a focused way. Talk about the game. What's it going to, you know, where did this game come from? How do we dismantle this game if that's where we want to go with it, et cetera. But really have focused meetings on all this, because up until now, I've kind of gravitated towards big meetings where we kind of talk about everything, right? But I think it'll be very powerful to start to chunk this out into focus topics, focus meetings on specific topics. Does that make sense to everybody? I know Michael's rocking his head up and down. Thank you, Michael. Any other comments on this overall approach?
I wonder, is Trove or Catalyst a background to the meetings? Is that a way for people to have background information about the people who are in meetings?
Yes, absolutely. It's a way for people to get.
I mean, a way to network. Pardon me. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the whole idea of Trove, is to provide a space for putting your meetings up on a calendar, but also putting links and information for each meeting for people to review before the meeting, and also to post after the meeting so people can go back to that. Oh, I missed that meeting, and watch the recording or related information, but also to see who was in the meeting and how do I network with them. So Trove also has these, you know, social networking features, and a lot of that's centered around meetings, but also a lot of it's centered around projects, right? And whole organizations. It's really well thought out, the whole Trove platform. So now, again, our focus here with the Chrysalis calendar is really more on the calendar side of that, putting up all these different meetings up on the calendar, not just us, but anyone who basically says, whoa, love what you all are doing with the Chrysalis calendar, you know, let me put my meetings there. Great, we'll make you a member and you can post your own meetings, all for free, of course. But anyway, I just wanted to get clear on what my intention is by mapping out the story of the Chrysalis as it's occurring to me or to us, and that the intention is that we then chunk this out into specific meetings that we can put on the calendar, right? But the meetings would cover all these topics. Each meeting would cover either one or two, maybe. Some of them would cover all these topics. Like this meeting right here, right now that we're recording, covers all these topics. And it's called the Chrysalis story, right? So it's kind of a big, broad meeting we're having right now. But then I'm also proposing that we have, you know, maybe smaller, shorter, more focused meetings on specific topics, so that over the course of the week, we kind of ratchet through each of these topics in the story so that we get kind of a 360-degree view of the Chrysalis, of the, you know, the overall story, the big picture, through a series of such meetings. And then each week, we basically run through the same set of topics, but now with more perspective, with having had the previous meetings under our belt, right? So Thank you, Michael. All right, thanks. Okay, so any questions or comments about where we're going with this, or what the context for this is? Everybody digging it? All right. And feel free to jump in with your own ideas, even if they contradict mine. Heaven forbid. Oh my goodness. So anyway, all right, continuing to screen share here. Okay, so the caterpillar. So we need to have some meetings, recurring meetings on the caterpillar for those who want to delve into that part of the story. And you know, those parts of the story. Okay, so we've got book 1, the caterpillar. Book 2 is the chrysalis. And obviously there's, you know, the transition from caterpillar to chrysalis, and that's really, you know, we're talking about that a bit here. I don't know if we need a, I don't know how to chunk all this out. That's why that's why we're talking about it, so we can see how, you know, how does it make sense to chunk all this out? But in terms of the chrysalis, here, let me just highlight here real quick, and then we can talk about it. Marco and I were talking about this last night. I'm pretty excited about this framing for this part of the story. Apollo 13, back in the 90s, there was a great documentary and a film starring Tom Hanks about Apollo 13. I think it's a really great metaphor for the chrysalis, and I'll get more into that. Related to that is the Klingons, and I'll talk about the Klingons and the imaginal cells, all of us. I'll talk about the survival of the imaginal cells in the face of attacks by the Klingons, right? Talk about an exciting story, right? So I'm going to get into all that. And this is really the essence of the chrysalis. This
question.
Yeah.
Are the Klingons from Star Wars?
No, the Klingons, well, originally from Star Trek. But the way I'm going to talk about the Klingons here is not so much building off of, I'm just kind of borrowing the name, because the Klingons are those who cling on to the old story, the old game of the caterpillar, the old all-day Monopoly game of infinite hoarding on a finite planet. They're clinging to that, even in the face of the world falling apart and the obviousness of switching to a new game. So I'll talk about the survival of the imaginal cells, us, in the face of the attacks, the onslaught of the Klingons, the unification of the imaginal cells, us uniting, all of us uniting, and forming a collective superintelligence. And then this brings us right here to present day, present moment, where phase 1 of us uniting to form a collective superintelligence is precisely the chrysalis calendars. And you see this big S at the end here of calendars. That's to emphasize that it's plural. And we'll talk more about that. And then we'll get to phase 2, which is going from a whole bunch of separate calendars to a universal calendar, a universal taxonomy, ultimately planetary governance, right? And then finally, phase 3, full-blown CSI, collective superintelligence. So collective superintelligence is going to be an evolution that goes in this direction from left to right. We're starting right here where we are on phase 1. Anyway, this is all within book 2, the chrysalis. And I'll get off screen share in a couple of minutes and we'll delve more into it. But first, let me at least mention book 3, the butterfly. See, the end point of all this, the end game of all this, chrysalis, evolution and work and development, is that we design and co-create the butterfly out of all this, right? And, you know, the butterfly is really that modality of life on Earth that is sustainable, regenerative, beautiful, loving, compassionate, healing, a world that works. And I'll talk about the two phases of designing the butterfly. This maps to the Apollo 13 thing that I'll talk about in a minute. But phase one is the dark side of the moon, and phase two is emergence from darkness. So, all right, let me get off screen share. Erase all this green stuff, get off screen share, and then we can talk about it all. All right. Okay. So the Chrysalis and Apollo 13. Raise your hand if you've either seen the documentary or the Hollywood movie called Apollo 13. Raise your hand. James, thank you. Which did you see, James, the documentary or the movie?
Both.
Cool.
Well, a good bit back now. Like, I mean, it's a good few years since I saw both. Like,
sorry, you broke up there a little bit at the end.
it's been a good while since I saw both. I mean, I knew about the Apollo mission and what happened and everything else from the documentary I'd say it was about a year before that, but the film was years ago as well when it came out first.
What if you just lived through the actual event when it happened?
Oh, wow, Marco. Yeah, Marco lived through it. Well, we'll get back to Apollo 13, but first I need to mention Simon. It's great to see you. We were having a pretty good conversation before you arrived, but Simon, with you here, now it's perfect. Welcome, Simon. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. That's why I turned out, because I knew you were missing.
Awesome, awesome. Anyway, we are recording. We can pause anytime. Don't hesitate to request a pause.
Would you please pause?
Yes, pausing now. Okay, so Apollo 13, what's the essence of the story? True story. It was, I don't know, early 70s, 1972, whenever it was. And I guess it was the 13th Apollo mission or whatever. And so they send up the rocket and the astronauts are on board. And famously, the captain in charge of the Apollo mission up there in space radios back and says, Houston, we have a problem. There were some significant malfunctions that were happening. And not only was the mission compromised, but their lives were now at risk, right? And the commander back in Houston was Eugene Kranz, right? A very senior, accomplished NASA, engineer, officer, captain, general, whatever, but the real deal, right? He was in charge of the mission from the NASA side, from the Earth side, mission control. And 1970, thank you. They realized, immediately the gravity of the situation, that their lives were at risk. And he told everyone in the room, it was like this big control room with all these computers and everything, computers such as they were in 1970, very expensive mainframe kind of IBM sort of systems. And he told the whole room, he said, look, we're going to work the problem. And he said, famously said, failure is not an option. We're going to bring these astronauts home safely. And so I break it down into two kind of phases of what they needed to design. And I really think this is a great metaphor, because basically Mother Earth right now is Apollo 13, right? We're malfunctioning like crazy, right? And worse than malfunctioning, we're malfunctioning, but the whole ship has been taken over by Klingons. And I use the term Klingons somewhat poetically, I hope, because they are clinging on to the old story of separation and the old game of infinite hoarding, individual hoarding for individual survival, first and foremost, followed by individual aggrandizement and satisfying the desires and fantasies of the ego, right? To own and control. All of which is just totally misguided, the biggest, most omnicidal illusion ever. And yet here we are, right? So the Klingons are clinging on to that old story and old game. We are the imaginal cells trying as hard as we can to regain control of the ship, right? Benevolent control, right? A form of control. It's not. It's not my favorite word, but I believe it is the correct word, right? We, humanity, need to regain benevolent control of our planet, right? And turn on the cooling systems. Design and build the cooling systems. If we don't cool it, we're dead. You've all seen the Guy McPherson video, the one that I've sent out an email a few times, the 9-minute video. Simon said it made him very depressed, right? We need these cooling systems, and we're not going to get them by hoping for them. We need to get control of the ship and design, build, and implement these cooling systems, right? And that's going to take massive cooperation by humanity. So getting control of the ship means humanity coming together. Now, humanity is obviously not just coming together on her own. It needs to be orchestrated. So how are we going to orchestrate the coming together? And how are we going to orchestrate the benevolent coming together of humanity to design, build, and implement all these solutions like the cooling systems in the face of all these attacking Klingons that are clinging on to the old story? So anyway, Apollo 13, there are two phases to what the Apollo engineers, scientists and engineers and technicians and astronauts needed to design and implement, okay? The first one is what I'll call phase one, the dark side of the moon. Thank you, Pink Floyd. And phase two is emergence from darkness. So dark side of the moon, here's what I mean by that. So when they first realized they had this major problem, Houston, we've got a problem. What they realized that they had a very limited window of time before the Apollo 13 ship was going to go behind the moon and they would lose radio contact. Okay, that's very significant because there were just, I don't know, what was it, 3 astronauts on board the Apollo mission? Was it just 3 of them? I think it was 3. And meanwhile, there's hundreds of folks at NASA working the problem. And so they were leveraging the collective intelligence of all those folks at NASA in Houston and other offices, other facilities of NASA, JPL, et cetera. But they only had communication for a limited period of time before the ship went around the dark side of the moon, the other side of the moon, and would lose radio contact. So phase one is, what do we need to do to get the ship into I'll just say a quasi-stable equilibrium state that you can survive the lap around the dark side of the moon, so that when you emerge on the other side and we've got radio contact again, we can then communicate to you exactly what the plan is, exactly what you're going to need to do to get yourselves home safely. Does that make sense? So phase one, phase two. Phase one is, what do we need to design and implement right now before you go dark side of the moon? And then phase two, what do you need to do once you emerge from darkness? Any questions or comments about the phase one, phase two framing? Go ahead, Simon. Yeah.
Yeah, I turned up, Jamie, because I got to go in 20 minutes or so, but I read your email and I actually watched your YouTube video with Marco. And it occurred to me that there's an awful lot of talk about super collective intelligence, but what you're not talking about is nodes of intelligence, which is exactly what NASA was. Superintelligence takes place within communities. So, I was reading, what you wrote about the story of the Chrysalis, and it occurred to me that, it's something that I'm working on, but it just seems so appropriate. This idea of Chrysalis communities all over the world linking. So rather than trying to link individuals all the time, link communities of kindred spirits. So you've got nodes of NASAs all over the world. I mean, just if, why was, the very essence of the fact that NASA was in competition with, I don't know, Sputnik or whatever it was called, right over there, facility in Moscow was called. They set up in competition. That's what we can't afford. I was on another call last night with something called Deep Adaptation, which is started by a chap called Jem Bendel, who's a UK professor who basically took some time out and researched everything and decided we're all screwed, and set up this deep adaptation, which is about accepting that collapse is inevitable and how we're going to adapt to it, i.e. deep adaptation. But they were talking about the role of corporations in that, and what they described as sundowning corporations. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is, if we're serious about the stuff we're talking to, we simply can't afford a military industrial complex. It's got to go. We can't be bombing the shit out of each other anymore. It's just so incredibly primitive, and yet we keep doing it. So I just want to throw that in there. I read your email, like I said, I watched the video, and it really resonated with me that this story of the Chrysalis and superintelligence needs to recognize the fact that, very often the best ideas come out of tight-knit communities of a group of people.
Yeah, I would say that coming out of the quarantine is kind of like being in the Chrysalis phase. So people are opening up to new possibilities right now. So people may be more open to what we're working on and Imagineering, I believe.
Beautiful.
I mean, I'm just, I'm linked with you and Marco and Michael here. But, we're all individuals. And we're all over the world. And it's a fact that, historically, before globalization, things did happen within communities, tight-knit, geographical localities. And I think that for me, I'm far from alone, I'm only following the lead of others, but a lot of people are, really insistent that the answer has to be a reversal of the globalization back towards a community focus geographically.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I would assert that in addition to whatever geographical communities we belong to, we have a community right here that spans at the present moment England, Scotland, Ireland, the United States, and probably soon to be Canada. So at the moment, and that's just at the moment. Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, but I would describe that as like the umbrella, which is necessary, but Chrysalis, cells, whatever you call them, a chrysalis exists within a time and a place. Chrysalis isn't dispersed all over the world.
The way I envision it, the whole planet is a chrysalis, right? And we kind of we're now talking about two different kinds of communities, which is beautiful because they're both super relevant. One is local geographical communities, towns, villages, communes, whatever, right? But another are these virtual communities. This one is a virtual, what did you use the word cluster or cell, or I forget, let's call it a cluster, right? So we have geographical clusters, but then we have these, for lack of a better word, intellectual or spiritual clusters, like this one right here. The 8 of us or the 7 of us who are in this room right now, this virtual room, we're a cluster. And we're doing sense making together right here and now. And for me, these clusters are every bit as important as the local geographical based ones.
I agree, but I don't know if this is a peculiarly European thing, but we have this thing called twinning, where cities or towns twin with other localities. And just an idea, like there are 5 or 6 people living in your part of the world, having a meeting with somewhere. I mean, what that internet provides is the opportunity to twin and really get to know people where they live. I was just reading your email and it just struck me that, the super collective intelligence is all about the power of the individual and coming together collectively. That's what we're trying to achieve for the power of that combination. But historically, and, I think the best ideas is, within communities, because you can actually implement it then as well. It actually means something. If you want to implement what we're talking about here, then it is on the ground within communities, isn't it? So that needs to be part of the equation. That's all I'm suggesting.
Yeah, absolutely, Simon. So imagine, say, for example, the cooling systems of the planet, right? Solar radiation management. It's going to take massive planetary coordination of people all around the world because it impacts us all. And it's going to require everyone's participation and support and lack of opposition, right? Currently, there's probably more opposition to geoengineering solutions generally as a class than there is support for it, right? So it's really not something that just local communities can say, oh, we're going to go do solar geoengineering, right? And expect to be successful because there's so much opposition. So bottom line, for cooling the planet, we need to come together and form this collective superintelligence to come to terms, to do collective sense making, and then collective design of whatever solutions we're going to implement. And then at the end of all that, the final stage is implementation. And of course that happens with local groups doing physical stuff at specific locations, right? But it first needs to be agreed to and designed by humanity as a whole, right? And that will take place in meetings just like this one, which are of necessity virtual, because it's in these virtual meetings that we bring the people together from different parts of the world to work on different parts of the problem, right? So they're both essential. Both virtual meetings, virtual communities, virtual clusters like this one, as well as the local ones. They're both essential. I'm not arguing for one over the other at all. They're the yin yang. We need them both. Absolutely. Now, for big, complex solutions like solar radiation management to cool the planet at planetary scale, requiring millions of square kilometers of reflectivity deployed throughout the oceans, Arctic regions, deserts of the world, humanity first needs to come to agreement. And we also need to have some form of global governance to basically say, yes, we're going to do this, and to then divide and conquer, and to come up with a global plan that then is defined by local implementations at all these locations throughout the world, whether giant manufacturing facilities cranking out the mirrors, local maritime deployment teams, launching from port cities in England, France, China, California, you name it, right? Now that's where the local implementation comes to play. But we first had to design the whole program at a planetary scale. And that's of necessity a virtual homework assignment for humanity. That's what we're taking on right here through these virtual meetings. So they're both essential, just they operate kind of at different scales, right? But they work, they're very complementary. One cannot work without the other, right? So for the collective superintelligence, the way I envision it, there are basically two types of clusters. One are the virtual clusters and the other are the local clusters, right? And each of us will be members of both kinds, right? I'm participating in this virtual cluster where I'm the only person on Whidbey Island who's here in this room, period, right? And the rest of you are in different locations throughout the world. There are other meetings that I have that are local on Whidbey Island saying this is what we have to do right here on our island, right? Those are geographical, local, maybe in person, right? So we need both. And we need both to be working with each other. And so the way that I envision all of this coming together is that all of these clusters will have their own calendars and say, hello, virtual cluster called The Conversation, which is this one right here. We're going to have a meeting called the press conference on Thursday. Da, 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 da. I send out the email. It's up on the calendar and we meet, right? Local clusters will also have their calendars. So part of the evolution of all this that I envision is that all these disparate calendars will somehow be brought together into a universal calendar, which is searchable, well indexed. You can do keyword searches. Maybe AI can help you find those meetings that you really need to plug into, right? Whether it's bringing together different virtual clusters that really need to be talking with each other, or connecting a specific virtual cluster that's figured out some part of SRM with a local geographical cluster that needs to implement it, for example. Is that all making sense, what I'm saying? Anyone?
Just to me, Jamin, it's just needs to start to build, doesn't it? Really, that's the it needs a momentum, which I'm sure will come.
Right. The question is, will it come fast enough? Because the forces of planetary overheating, yeah, that's serious business, and it's coming like a freight train, like a 200-car freight train, just barreling down on us. So the question is, will it happen fast enough? That's why I'm here, right? Putting everything I have on the table to accelerate it. And for me, the first point, the first thing that makes sense for us to do that I'm proposing is that we tell a story about this that will help magnetize our own virtual community, right? To build out our own Chrysalis calendar, partly as a model, an example for the world to say, here's our Chrysalis calendar. Here's what we're doing. Check it out. Come join us. Come join us in our meetings. And where is your calendar? Do you have one? We think you need one, right? Because if we're going to create this united universal calendar, we first need to start with the parts, individual Chrysalis calendars in different parts or clusters or cells, whether geographical or topical and virtual. Each one needs its own calendar so that we can have some parts to assemble, right? Does that make sense? Do you agree?
So how do you propose to link these disparate calendars?
Yeah. So I have some vague ideas about it, but I'm not first of all, I'm not so focused on that right now immediately, because I have faith that there are technical solutions that can link them very efficiently that I'm just simply not aware of, right? You know, Google got the whole internet linked up in different ways. Facebook linked it up in other ways, Twitter in other ways, Reddit in other ways, Wikipedia in other ways. And so I think that the tools and solutions for linking all these calendars together, I think they already exist. I just don't know about them, other than in general terms. In general terms, what I'm imagining is some sort of a super database, kind of like Trove, right? But on a much bigger scale, and which will accommodate calendars that are created on different platforms, in different formats, in different languages, right? And we'll integrate them into, you know, a super database, a data lake, as we would call it at Microsoft, right? That you can simply connect all these calendars to. So an aggregator, essentially, right? Now, Google indexed the whole internet starting in the late 90s. And you didn't even have to know about Google to get indexed by Google. They found you, right? So it could be an aggregator solution that scours the internet and finds all these calendars and then links to them and essentially sucks in their data and, you know, puts it all into a massive database that gets constantly refreshed, constantly updated. You know, just like with Google, every time anyone publishes a website, within hours, it's indexed by Google and it's searchable and findable, right? We need that sort of a capacity to ingest all these different Chrysalis calendars. Is that an acceptable answer for starters? And feel free to add to it, everyone. Go ahead.
Well, I think essentially, you know, if we're using Catalyst / Trove, and we're organized into communities. We're the Chrysalis community, and that's our Chrysalis calendar. So anybody else that has a community on Trove then has their own calendar. And that's essentially, you know, what's going to, you know, be searchable, and we can find, you know, by all the different categories that Vincent has laid out there. There's like multiple ways to find similar groups. So essentially all the Chrysalis calendars could be on Trove. The question that came up earlier when you say, you know, now I know we offer everything for here, you know, at free, at no charge. Is Trove always going to be that way? Or, you know, I somehow had the idea that eventually Vincent wants to, you know, make some kind of an income, but I wasn't exactly sure how that was, where that came in with, you know, Trove.
He's not sure either, but he definitely wants to monetize it. He's a young man, needs to make a living, so yeah.
And I'll offer something here. This is a very interesting question, definitely very relevant to us, but I would propose that it's outside the scope of this present conversation, which is very high level, very general. And I think, as I've noted before, money can be actually a destructive rat when pursued at the wrong time. I think this is the wrong time for that conversation, but I just want to offer that. I don't want to impose it. I just want to offer that.
No, I agree. I don't want to take us off the main thing. It's just, you know, it just occurred to me, and I guess what I'm looking for here is that we remember to bring it up at another time, even if I don't.
Okay, I'll make note of it, Marco. so that we can bring it up this Friday
Yeah.
in our
You
meeting.
think I'd remember till tomorrow? I can make notes too. I should.
Okay. Well, I just want to take it off the table now so we can get back.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So noted. Okay. So back to it. So Trove, since we're on the topic of Trove is an example of where it's pointing in the right direction. I don't know if Trove will take us, humanity, the world, all the way there. But it's the closest thing I've seen to what we are wanting in terms of aggregating all these disparate Chrysalis calendars, right? And I know that Vincent has made some work in the direction of integrating even communities and data that don't even know about Trove. So performing that sort of Google-like function, right? Of being sort of this universal aggregator. And by the way, Google wouldn't have been successful if they had charged money of the users. They charge money to advertisers, but not to the users. So whatever solution, whether Trove or otherwise, it'll have to be free. The indexing will have to be free. The searching will have to be free. They may have a way of monetizing it, but I don't think it'll get in the way of users using it for free and communities having their calendars indexed for free. So I think it's kind of a non-issue for where we're going, even with our discussions with Vincent. But anyway, passing the feather.
Well, if it's free, the only other option is advertising. I know you want to get off the subject, but that free thing is kind of doesn't exist, sadly, in the something that has to be paid for. The money has to come from somewhere.
Well, let me. Yeah.
I mean, we're expecting a lot of Vincent. We're asking him to, to think about his calendar within the context of our needs. And I think he's working huge hours on it. But you're right, put it to one side for the moment. Basically what you're describing a calendar as a search engine or a search engine calendar.
Well, I think search is an important part of it, but it's not the whole of it. It's not just a search engine, but it's a very important facet. So as I envision this emergent universal calendar, which I really think is going to be the next stage in evolution for us to get to collective superintelligence, we're going to need to get through this to have a universal calendar, which is just a fundamental basic level of getting us all connected, getting us all on the same page, so that we at least can have visibility, transparent visibility into all the different meetings that are happening out there in different parts of the Chrysalis, whether virtual meetings that are topic-based like this one, or local geographic, town hall or village meetings, right? That we need to have this transparent visibility so that people like us can then go from meeting to meeting and be sort of like the covalent electrons that unite the different clusters together in conversation. That's how I see it. I'd love to hear how you all see it.
I think there's some good questions to save up for Vincent, who I think is due again tomorrow, isn't it?
Yeah, he'll be back tomorrow. I think at 10:30 Pacific time, which is 1:30 Eastern.
Okay. Maybe appropriate to run it by him tomorrow, what his thoughts are. Meanwhile, I got another meet on the hour, which I need to give a bit of thought to, but I just want to catch up with you. It's all progress.
Very good, very good. Yeah. Let's definitely discuss all this with Vincent tomorrow. This is,
all right.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Take care then. Bye now.
All right, Simon. Thanks so much. See you soon. So we're still recording. Anyway, this gets to the heart of what we're talking about here, is the calendar part of it. I really see the universal calendar as that thing that's going to be just this vital platform for having planetary collective superintelligence and ultimately planetary governance. You know, humanity talking with each other. I mean, how else are we going to coordinate if not through conversation? By sending missiles at each other, having competing military industrial complexes, right? It's absurd. Conversation, obviously. Well, how are we going to have conversations if we don't know where the meetings are? Who's posting what meetings? It's just, for me, the Chrysalis calendar and the Chrysalis calendars, plural, and ultimately the universal calendar, that is the 1, 2, 3 stages of evolution that we need to go through. And I'm kind of blown away that if this is the pathway to saving, healing, and transforming life on Earth, out of the 8 billion people on the planet, there's only 5 of us here talking about this. Isn't that kind of like a big blow your mind mystery? Well, part of the reason is we haven't gotten our calendar up yet for people to find us in a systematic way. So that's why we're working on it. However slowly, but we're working on it. Passing the feather.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing that will help. I've been pretty busy, but I finally got the hang of putting things on the calendar and being able to invite people to put, modify their things on the calendar. So once people see how easy it is, I'm sure it'll catch on. We just got to get enough people to the Friday meetings with Vincent. And I don't know if there's anything we can do to put a little more emphasis on that.
No, I'm sure there's a lot we can do. And I think the next stage for us is to put our meetings up on the calendar. But before we can do that, we're doing what we're doing right here, right now, which is figuring out what those meetings should be and chunking out our hours in the week into these specific meetings and getting them up on the calendar. That's why I created this map, which I'll get back to sharing in a moment. And I think the map of topics should map to the story. So the story I'm telling here, it breaks into 3 phases. Let's just review. Caterpillar, chrysalis, butterfly. Now the point of the chrysalis is to design and build the butterfly, right? The butterfly is where we need to get to. The chrysalis is an intermediate phase. It's like a bridge between the omnicidal caterpillar and the butterfly, right? It's just a transitionary phase. So, that's just what we need to focus on right now, is the chrysalis. Right now, we have just the beginnings of a chrysalis. Yeah, there's a few imaginal cells here and there, or a bunch of them, but we're so disconnected, right? So the evolution of the chrysalis that I see is we get our act together on our chrysalis calendar, a whole bunch of other clusters, whether virtual or geographical, get their acts together for their chrysalis calendars, and then a trove can come along and connect them all together into one big universal calendar. And that provides the foundation for collective superintelligence. All these different meetings hyper-connected through a calendar, through a universal calendar through search, like we were talking about, through social networking features, like Vincent is building into Trove, etc.
You know, we're just in such a precarious mixture of, you know, some things can't be rushed. You know, you can't. I lost there was a wine analogy that I just lost. Combination of some things just take time. We don't have very much time left. It takes more than 5 of us showing up on a regular basis, or even a dozen, you know, and it's that combination of enough people, enough time, and then knowing the right things to do. And then even if you know the right thing to do, to be able to implement them, you know, when it comes to planetary scale things, obviously, who has the right to make those decisions? And it's sometimes hard to have faith that we're going to be able to pull it off and have the human race survive.
I'm going to pause recording for a second.